Hey guys, how's it going? Today we're going to be hopping right into Chapter 1. Chapter 1's a bit more complicated than the prologue, but it's still pretty simple. We got 3 castles to seize. First we got to take out Genoa and Marfa, and then we can finally go for Verdane. Genoa is sending their troops at us first, so that's what we're going to go after first. One thing you'll notice right off the bat when you look at our units is our units all look a bit different than how they were in the previous map. This is because we went through the arena on a lot of them. We'll go more into what the arena is later, but for now, just know that the arena allows our units to gain lots of experience and money. You'll also have noticed we've traded some weapons around. Genealogy doesn't have a natural trade function, so what you have to do is sell weapons and rebuy them at the pawn shop. For the relatively inexpensive items we have now, this isn't too big of a deal, but on some items this can be a real problem. The main things that we've done is we've given Quan's Javelin to Finn so that he can build up a lot of kills for it on this map. And then we bought Quan a brand new Javelin that we'll also be putting kills on. We traded Sigurd's Steel Sword over to Alex so that he can also build some kills on that. And we bought Lex a fancy new Steel Axe. Our strategy for this map is we're going to have Finn basically solo everything. You see, I mentioned last map, Finn is one of the better combat units in this game, and this map is going to show why. You see, Finn has a skill in this game called Miracle, which upon taking damage that drops his HP below 11, he receives an 11 minus HP times 10 bonus to avoid. This means if that Finn got dropped to 1 HP, he would get a 100% bonus to his avoid stat. It's important to note that enemies cannot see this avoid stat when it comes to determining who to attack, so Finn is a prime candidate to put in the range of a lot of enemies. Finn dodged a lot of enemies on this turn, and he wasn't supposed to do that. In fact, he was supposed to be dropped to an HP stat where the enemies would then trigger his miracle range and they would no longer be able to hit him. However, they all missed him, which caused some enemy targeting to go a bit incorrectly for us, but overall it didn't matter and we were able to compensate for it. In the lower left, we had 2 units that join us. Their names are Edane and Du. They're being chased by Marfa Axe Fighters, so we need to make sure that they don't get caught by them. It's important that they move their maximum movement every turn, and especially Du has an important job near Genoa. Seizing Genoa Castle isn't very hard because it's very poorly defended. The boss fight actually attacked us in the first wave of enemies, so we've already gotten rid of him. The warrior defending the castle is a little bit too bulky for Sigurd to one round, so we're going to send Midir to go weaken him. However, the main threat of Genoa Castle is Ira. She's the female sword fighter that you see outside. She's a recruitable character, and she will only join us if we seize Genoa Castle without killing her and then having Sigurd talk to her. What this means is that in order to recruit her without losing turns, we need to make her move as far away from Genoa and as close to Marfa as possible. Ira's kind of a nasty enemy because she has a 16% chance of proccing Astra. If she does so, that unit is basically dead. The only unit that can fight her without that being a problem is Alec, though Alec can't move far enough to bait her correctly, so we actually are going to have to risk it no matter what we do. This is where Du comes in. Du's actually not doubled by Ira because Ira's weighed down by her Iron Blade. This means Du has the second best chance of surviving Ira. And as a little bonus, Du's going to steal her money. We still have to make sure our units are safe from Ira, so we have Alec and Nisha block Ira's east. This prevents Ira from being able to attack Sigurd, which is what her priority is. Alec and Nisha equip lances, which convince Ira not to want to attack either of them. And then we have Lex and Ethelyn sit on forest terrain. Unfortunately, Genealogy's AI is still somewhat random. So what we're doing by having Arden fail at the arena a couple times is we're burning some random numbers, and you'll be seeing this quite a lot. This is to ensure that Ira decides to attack Du and not Ethelyn. Now that the scary stuff's done for a little while, we can talk about Du and Edane. Du's a fairly interesting unit due to his Thief class. The Thief class has 2 unique abilities. The first is that they steal money from any enemy that they are able to hit. The second ability is they're able to give money to any other unit. These 2 abilities combined make these a very unique class in Fire Emblem 4, and for a run like this, they become a pretty key player in the success of the run. There are a lot of tricks in this run that are only accomplished by units having more money than they normally have access to, so a big part of planning this run is making sure Du can get enough money and give enough money to anyone that needs it. Du also has the bargain skill, which is pretty interesting. It allows him to buy items at their sell price. This effectively means no money is lost upon him trading at the pawnbroker, which is pretty cool. Edane's also kind of an interesting unit. She has a high staff rank, which allows her to use some higher tier staffs that Ethelyn can't, namely the warp staff that she'll get from Du. The warp staff allows the Dane to warp a unit to any of the castles that we've sieged previously, which isn't quite as cool as warp is in other games, but it's still going to be useful to us. Ethlin received the return staff, which combines well with the warp staff, as one of the dominant strategies for getting units around a map is to return them from wherever they're at and then warp them to the castle you desire. Casual players tend to find stuff like this to be quite annoying, but in a low turn run this is essential, and it's a big reason why Ethlin is considered to be such a good unit in this run. We also got the unit Ira. As you'll soon find out, she's a lot stronger when she's an enemy than when she's on the player side. This isn't because Ira's stats changed at all, but it's because Ira's Astra skill functions a lot better as a failure chance for the player than a success chance. Ira's very squishy, and she doesn't have a lot of movement, so there's very little reason to trek her anywhere. However, she will help us out ever so slightly when it comes to the third castle of this map. You may have noticed that we equipped Finn with an Iron Lance instead of the Javelin on that last enemy phase. The reason is he's fighting enemies on forest terrain, which have 20 more avoid. We do lose out on some kills, but it's not a big deal. You may have also noticed that there's a lot of red units trying to attack our castle at the north, and they're being intercepted by some friendly green units. These guys aren't really a threat, they're kind of just there to waste screen time. However, a careful observer may have noticed that we sent Azel in that direction. The reason we're doing this is Azel needs another defense proc in order to clear the arena, and we're going to get that on him by having him kill the commander of that red squad. As we know, Fire Emblem players are subject to the law of triviality, and as such, they put more stock into less important issues than more important issues. And because of that, and the fact that two women have just joined us, many players deem it necessary to talk about pairing at this point, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to skip talking about Edane's pairing right now because the dude we're going to be forcing on her hasn't joined yet. Instead, we'll talk about Ira's pairing. We're going to be pairing Ira and Lex. The reason for this is Lex's Paragon skill nets us about 4 levels on each of Ira's kids. In retrospect, this didn't really do anything for us. In fact, made Lex a much worse unit. So personally, I would just recommend not pairing Ira at all in a run like this. The substitutes for Ira's kids are actually more than capable of handling themselves on the parts of the game that matter for them. And in fact, they're more reliable than Ira's kids at doing it. But at the time this run was being recorded, I wasn't aware that levels were going to be as easy as they were to achieve. So we have to live with the sins of our past. Ira's daughter is also going to let us inherit swords to the next generation, which isn't the biggest deal in the world, but it does make things moderately more convenient for us. Gandalf is a similar boss to the boss of the prologue. He's a bit too bulky for Sigurd to one-round KO, so we're going to have Ethlin stand next to Sigurd to crit him. At this point, we have a few more options for taking out bulky bosses, but Ethlin is still the most reliable unit for this, so we're going to use her. You know, this quad hasn't really done a whole lot this map, and he's been just running ahead of the army without a care in the world. This is because we need him to save a turn at the very end of the map, and in order for him to do this, he has to run ahead of Sigurd by at least 1 turn. So that's why you see him going around the top of Marfa Castle and not helping out with the actual castle. Now that Marfa's seized, we don't really have much of a use for most of our units, so we're going to have Edane start to warp them back to the home castle. Edane needs to promote by Chapter 3, and warp is the best way that she can gain experience, so there's no real reason not to spam it here. We're also warping Finn back to the home castle for another reason. He's going to sell his javelin so that Sigurd can take it up. Finn can't really contribute to the final part of the map, but Sigurd's going to be fighting a lot of enemies, so it only makes sense to get more kills with that same javelin. Luckily, the pawnbroker is the same across all castles and can instantaneously transfer items across the continent. We're not going to be sending Ira through the arena, and now's a pretty decent time to explain a bit more in detail about what the arena is. Basically, the arena's got 7 encounters, each of them gets progressively harder, and the rewards for completing them gets progressively better. The encounters aren't randomized in any way, so everybody fights the same set of enemies, although bow users fight a slightly different enemy every now and again. One important thing to note is that when we're doing mid-map arenas that are not in the home castle, we do not have an infinite amount of time to rig these arenas. So Ira's going to have to clear all these in 1 turn, so if Ira messes up, then that kind of sucks for us. Luckily, if there's one thing that Ira's known for being good at, it's clearing the arena, so this isn't really a problem. The main reason we're doing this is because we want to get a few extra levels on Ira to help us at Verdane Castle. The Spirit Forest is a very nasty place. It's a 1-tile choke point with a lot of axe fighters and a very scary archer enemy. His name is Yamke, he's recruitable. It's really hard to undersell how scary Yamke is as an enemy. He's basically Ira on steroids. He has a killer bow, which allows him to get a critical hit based on his skill stat, similar to Ira's Astra skill. However, he can also proc Adept, which gives him more attacks, and Charge, which gives him even more attacks. In order to recruit him, we need to get Adane to talk to him. And Adane's not a very fast unit, so in order to win this map without losing turns, we're going to have to sneak Sigurd and Quan around him without killing him. And that's quite an annoying task. This is actually going to be one of the more unreliable parts of the entire playthrough. The issue is that we need Quan to kill enemies, and he needs to do that by getting Adept procs because he can't double naturally. And enemy HP in this game is so inflated that there's no way he's going to one-shot them. Quan's also going to have to dodge a fair number of enemies. He doesn't have to dodge all of them, but he does need enough HP to take a hit from Verdane Castle's guards. Luckily, the forest provides us with 20 avoid, but once we're out of the forest, Quan dodging enemies is going to be quite impractical, so it's important to rig the dodges here than later. Unfortunately, Quan's going to take a round of combat with Yamke here due to his positioning, and there really isn't anything that we can do about that. All we really ask for is that Quan is able to survive a round of combat with him. It doesn't really matter how. Unfortunately, with Yamke's incredibly high accuracy, crit, adept proc, and charge chance, Quan's chance of survival is not the best, and so we're going to have to rig this in his favor. Some of you may have noticed that we sent Du off to the right side of the map, and there's a reason for this. There's a brigand that we've sort of left alive the entire map that burned down an entire village. A lot of people get a little antsy about this because they think about all the money lost. However, we're actually getting more money by letting that guy survive. Village raiders in this game always have 5,000 gold on them, which is the maximum amount of money that you get out of a village. So by having Du steal that money off him, we actually get more money than had we stopped him from burning down the whole village earlier in the map. Du unfortunately can't take the brigand all by himself. We're going to have Nisha come down and help him out. When Sigurd moved in, he recruited a unit by the name of Deirdre. She's kind of important right now because she's going to attack Yamke, who's going to attack her. And most people would think this is very dangerous, but Deirdre luckily has Miracle, a lot like Finn. It's not on her skill sheet, but it's actually from an item in her inventory. With a combination of the Forest Terrain, Sigurd's Leadership bonus, and Miracle, Yamke's chance of hitting her is very low. And the main reason we do this is because Charge will only proc if you have higher than 24 HP, so this basically prevents that from ever happening again. It also encourages Yamke to try and kill her, even though he has no chance of being able to do that, and it allows Quan and Sigurd to sort of escape without having to face his wrath any further. One of the problems with this strategy is that Deirdre can actually kill Yamke. She runs about a 50% chance of hitting him, and she needs to land one of her hits, but not the other, which means the strategy has about 50% chance of working. This is still way better than taking extra rounds of combat from Yamke and our other units, so that's why we're going with it. Unfortunately, Miracle only works for one turn, so we're going to pull Deirdre back, and we're going to have Ira finish baiting him down to Ideen. Ira has Nihil, which means she can't be cripped by Yamke. She's also fast enough to not be doubled by him, and because we sent her through the arena, she has enough HP to not get 2-hit KO'd by him, so she's perfectly safe to bait Yamke. And this is sort of the big contribution that Ira has to this chapter. If you're doing a more casual playthrough, then an easier way to recruit Yamke is just to wait outside the forest for him to leave, and then recruit him with Adane. He won't attack Adane, so this is a pretty safe and reliable way to do this. So if you don't care about turn count, then that's a pretty good way to go about this part. You're going to see now why we've been so aggressive about pushing Quan forward, is he's going to bait all of the hunters around Verdane Castle away from the castle. This allows Sigurd to clean up all of them when he gets there, so that way there is nothing stopping him from going after the boss. No other unit can really do this other than Quan, and it is certainly difficult to get Quan through here, but it's also really the only way that you can 17 turn clear this map, so we have to do it. We can talk a bit about Deirdre as a unit. She can't promote despite being in an unpromoted class, and she can't leave the castle after Chapter 2. She does have a B rank in stabs though, and that's going to be useful to us as she's another unit that has access to the warp staff. So you'll be seeing a good amount of use out of her in the next chapter, and then never again. There's also Yamke. I know we spent a good portion of this video talking about how scary of an enemy Yamke is. However, the same is not true in the hands of the player. A lot of new players think Yamke is a very strong unit, and that's not a surprise considering how strong the killer bow is. However, we're going to sell that bow onto Midir by the end of this chapter, and Yamke is never really going to see it again. Without the killer bow, there isn't really anything noteworthy to talk about him, and he's going to more or less be the weakest unit in this run. That isn't to say he won't be doing something important for us, though I wouldn't call what he does flattering. You'll see more of what we're talking about in the next chapter. At this point, the map is pretty much over, yet you'll notice in the original video there's about 10 more minutes of footage. This is because a large portion of the end of this chapter was getting some of the weaker units through their final arenas. As has been alluded to several times, we actually beat the experience rank in this run by quite a bit. So going out of our way for some of the more terrible arenas was probably a waste of time. The one set of terrible arenas that we do have to go through are dues. He needs to clear the arena so he has money for the next chapter. And he's not the best unit at taking out some of these enemies. Some people suggest doing weird tricks like grinding up a slim sword in order for Dew to have a better chance at clearing these arenas. But honestly, it's not really that big of a deal. You're only really saving one turn by making all this money on him. And if you're really dead set on getting that money on him, a better solution instead of grinding kills on a slim sword is just to grind money on Dew. He only needs 15,000 gold on him, which takes about 4 to 5 turns more of grinding, which is way better than trying to get slim sword kills. Again, though, you really shouldn't even worry about it. It's a single turn save. Some people probably wonder how I managed to get through all of these very complicated arenas. And the answer to that is I had a computer solve it for me. As mentioned previously, Genealogy's RNG is very predictable. So once you know where you're at in the random number generator, it's very trivial to have a computer sort through all of the possible number combinations in order to get the ones that you need. This is also how I was able to get such good level ups throughout this playthrough. Some people want to know where the pre-map arenas are, and the answer is I didn't really record those because they're really tedious to record, and I don't have any of the data anymore on how to replicate them because I just didn't keep track of it. For anyone looking to replicate this playthrough, it's probably best to figure it out yourself. I burned way too many random numbers that weren't needed. Our unit stats are way higher than they ever would have to be in this run, so your run would probably look way more impressive if you did it on your own. On this last enemy phase here, Sigurd's going to be fighting a lot of enemies with the Javelin. These hunters have an attack speed of 0, which means Sigurd needs 19 speed to be able to double them. This is a pretty high speed benchmark. It means Sigurd needs to get a speed level on almost all of his levels. It is possible to play around not doubling these guys, though that would mean we get less kills in the Javelin. It's also possible for Sigurd to buy Finn's speed ring. Doing this, though, would deprive Dew of the speed ring, which would force us to grind even longer in the arenas, and I didn't want to have to do that. I don't have a whole lot left to talk about, and there's several minutes of arena left, so we're going to skip past all of that to the end of the chapter. If you really want to see all the footage, then the original video is still going to exist, so I'd look at that. But it's not very exciting. And we're back now with Midir's final arena. Pretty much all we got left to do is a bit more EXP management, and then we're going to have Sigurd kill the boss and seize. The boss is a Dark Mage boss, which you'll be seeing quite a lot of, and they are not hard to kill. Sigurd can almost always one-round KO these without any trouble, and this one is no different. With that, we're going to wrap up Chapter 1. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me next time for Chapter 2. Later.